Hey my fellow Ice Cubes, do you remember those days where if you wanted to play a game, it was as simple as just going to your browser and going to a website that hosted a bunch of games? Yeah, nowadays you have to install like a 100 GB file, and you also need to have like some crazy NVIDIA 4000 series graphics card just to play the game. For me, Flash games were a big part of my childhood, and they probably were for you too. I remember constantly playing these games at school because I just couldn't get bored of them. All of this makes me wonder, what happened to these games and why does no one play these anymore? So in today's video, I will be explaining the entire history of Flash games to find out the answer to that question. For me to fully explain Flash's impact on gaming, we have to start from the beginning. So it's the early 1990s, and the Flash doesn't exist yet. However, what does exist is a software called Future Splash, which is an animation tool. This tool eventually becomes so efficient at creating animations that Adobe decides to buy it and rebrands it to Flash. From there, Flash became an extremely important part of the web, being heavily used by video players like YouTube, Hulu, and others. This eventually sparked the start of Flash game hosting websites such as Newgrounds, Armor Games, and as you may already know, the most popular one being Cool Math Games. In fact, Cool Math Games became so popular that it ended up bringing the rise to some of the most nostalgic games in history. Throughout the mid-2010s and the years following, Cool Math's game's popularity was at an all-time high. Every kid in your class was probably playing Run, Duck Life, or some variation of the Papa's games. It's interesting to note that by looking at Cool Math Games' Google Trends graph, we can see that the popularity drops off every summer, which makes sense because kids aren't at school and aren't bored enough to play these types of games. It's crazy that when we were younger, we had games that were simple and fun, but now with the rise of Gen Alpha, they're playing things like Fortnite and Skibidi Toilet Sword Battle. Like, why does this have more than 100,000 downloads? So I'll quickly explain a bunch of Cool Math games to show you how innovative and fun they were. Run. It's an incredibly simple concept to understand. You play as this little alien guy and you just run and jump on floating platforms through space. You can play as the normal runner for slower paced gameplay, or the skater guy if you want to go really fast. Later in the newer versions of the Run game, you're introduced to this green lizard man who jumps really high at the cost of being incredibly slow. Run 3 also introduced us to a new mechanic, falling tiles. You step on them once and they fall. All in all, Run was one of the first games to take advantage of Flash's 3D abilities and really showed off how fun something as simple as a Flash game could be. Duck Life. You play as this little yellow duck and you train him at running, flying, and swimming to improve his skills. After grinding the same exact minigames over and over again for 10 hours, you can put your duck's abilities to the test by racing it against other ducks. All in all, it was a pretty fun game, although it did get repetitive pretty quickly, especially after they released a couple of more games that were basically the same thing, Papa's Pizzeria and others. This is a series of games where you play as these weird looking bobblehead characters and you run a store. In some games it's an ice cream shop, in some games it's a pizza shop, in some games it's a burger shop. You take orders from customers and you make them food. At the end of the day, you collect profits and rank up to earn rewards. The whole purpose of the game is to try and make your customers as happy as possible and make them come back. I didn't really enjoy the game because it does get repetitive pretty quickly, but I do know people who enjoyed this game. Fireboy and Water Girl. This is a game where you can either play as, you guessed it, Fireboy or Water Girl. It's a two-player physics game where you try and solve puzzles. Most of the time, the game is played with 2 players because if you try to play it yourself, it's pretty awkward. The game also had many variations, such as a temple one, a forest one, even a light one, which all introduced new mechanics. While these games were fun and all, there was actually something bigger at play that skyrocketed the popularity of Flash games. See, at the same time Flash games were blowing up, something else was blowing up as well, and that being the world's biggest video sharing website, Vimeo. No, I'm just kidding, it was YouTube. The growth of YouTube and Flash games played into each other, with creators promoting and sharing their fun playing unique games. One of the most popular games played by YouTubers at the time was called Happy Wheels. I'm sure many of you have already heard about Happy Wheels by now, but if you haven't, it was one of the biggest community-driven Flash games of all time. Created by Jim Bonacci in 2010, it was a simple ragdoll physics game where you can play as different characters. What made the game stand out was its emphasis on cartoon gore. Like when you would die, your character would break into a bunch of body parts and spew blood all across the screen. Some may say this is horrifying, but I say it's pretty fun. But what made the game so popular was its inclusion of a level maker, and this meant that anyone could make their own levels and submit them for anyone to play. Fans of YouTubers like Tobuscus, DanTDM, and Jacksepticeye all made levels for them to play in their videos, which which only boosted Happy Wheels' popularity. The growth of Happy Wheels made it well known in the YouTube community, with YouTubers gaining millions of views per video. Now, I'm assuming YouTubers stopped playing Happy Wheels because YouTube as a platform was not so strict back in the early 2010s. However, later on, they decided to start demonetizing Happy Wheels videos because of its extreme emphasis on cartoon gore on something that looks like a game made for kids. And you know, YouTube being YouTube didn't like that. This wasn't the biggest blow to Flash games though, as something worse would happen later on. In 2017, Adobe, being Adobe, announced that they would end support for the Flash player near the end of 2020. Many rumors started circulating around that this would mean the end for websites like Cool Math Games, who relied on Adobe's Flash player to run their games. Not to worry yet, however, as Cool Math Games said they would be porting many of their games to a newer web standards such as HTML5, and as 2020 rolled around, Cool Math Games was still thriving and doing well. However, with the end of Flash player, many of the older, less popular titles such as Run 2 were never ported to HTML5, being lost in time forever. This was especially true for many games on Newgrounds, with older titles being rendered unplayable, now with Flash gone. While that may seem sad, it is important to note that Flash games have left a mark on the world forever. They weren't just fun to play, but they were a big part of my childhood. They gave rise to many different games that we play today. While Flash games are gone, their legacy and their impact still lives with us. Hopefully one day this era of gaming comes back. If I'm being honest, I really liked it. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and like, and join my Discord server while you're at it. And that's all I have for today's video. Goodbye.